to me, I think studios are meant to create shortcuts for founders, not in a bad way, like, oh, I snuck around something and cheated, but give me the shortcut tools to validate faster, get to market faster, raise capital faster, recruit a team faster. And those are all systems that a studio over time can build to support the founders that they're working with.
Welcome to the Unlearn Podcast, where host Barry O'Reilly seeks to synthesize the superpowers of extraordinary individuals to think big, start small, and learn fast. Here's your host, Barry O'Reilly.
Welcome to the Unlearn Podcast. On this show, I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Yoskovitz, founding partner at Highline Beta. Now, Highline Beta is a hybrid venture studio and venture capital firm working with large companies to innovate outside their core. They help new ventures internally and externally and invest in pre-seed and seed stage startups that have a meaningful connection to their corporate partners. Ben's an entrepreneur, investor, product expert, and author. In fact, that's how we met one another, through the Lean series with Eric Ries, where he co-authored the fantastic book Lean Analytics with Alastair Croll. It's actually one of my favorite books that I always recommend to startup founders. He also helped create 1 Year Labs, a pre-seed accelerator that had one company, Local Mind, acquired by Airbnb. It's a fantastic story in this show where we dive deeper into his own history, but building venture studios, what's involved with them, how hard it is, the different flavors and types and styles, plus how you can get started with your own, including both of our views on the future of venture studios. This is a great show. I'm excited to get started, but let's go back to where it all began for Ben.
The thing that I always think about, which did feel big at the time, so it didn't feel small at the time, was building a company called Standout Jobs back in 2007 to 2010. And I had built a business before that, more of a small business. It was never a venture backable sort of, it was a web agency. We then built project management software. So that's sort of, I started doing that. And then I said, okay, I'm going to go and build a new startup in the recruiting space called Standout Jobs. We raised capital for it. A lot of momentum, a lot of excitement back then, and failed pretty miserably from that experience. We ended up selling the assets of that company. 2008 was not a great time, mortgage crisis, recession. So some economic factors there as well. But fundamentally what happened was we built something that people didn't really want to buy. They said it looked cool. They were excited by it. The industry was like, oh, this is going to change how recruitment is done and blah, 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 but could not build a real business. And so, after that experience, I thought I never, ever, ever want to waste my time building something people don't want. So that fundamentally changed how I thought about building product and building companies. And that led to starting something called Year One Labs. So this was, 2010, 2011, 2012 now. So again, this is already 10 plus years ago. But Year One Labs was actually a venture studio. We just didn't call it that at the time. We called it an accelerator. But what we were doing with Year One Labs, myself, and that's when I met Alastair really, and we got working together, and two other partners, was super early stage founders. Maybe they had an idea, maybe they didn't. We'd put them together and we'd work with them for 9-ish months to build businesses literally from zero with a very, very small amount of money, about $50K, which, by the way, we tranched, if you can believe it. But this was right when Lean Startup was coming out, because Eric Ries was talking about his mistakes building things people didn't want. So we were applying Lean Startup at Year One Labs. We ended up building 5 businesses, one of which was co-founded by Lenny Rachitsky, who, many people will now know. That business was acquired by Airbnb, and he went on to do some amazing things, now writes a newsletter, does all kinds of incredible stuff. So 5 consumer businesses, one of them was acquired, one of them is still operating, and that's where we were applying lean principles in this venture studio model, and that's what led to writing the book. All of this comes from building things people don't want and falling on my face miserably, leads to Year One Labs, leads to writing Lean Analytics, and then ultimately leads to Highline Beta, which is the company, the venture studio and venture capital fund I started almost 8 years ago. But it all comes from failing and actually learning from that failure.
What I love though when you share these stories is just pulling so many of these threads together, right? Like one of probably the most fascinating things around that time is there were so many people who were doing various different guises of this testing and learning or interested about like how to build products better. And the Lean Startup as a book, of course, I felt like was a lightning rod moment to bring a bunch of people together. And then there was like a wave of that, right? Like people like yourself and Alastair. And yeah, as you say, it's so funny that you go on and build this sort of beginnings of a studio with Lenny, who, you know, now runs this amazing podcast and newsletter with hundreds of thousands of people following his stories of helping other people on their product management journey. So I just love how all these things are sort of self-reinforcing, and it feels like it's the heritage of so much of how this movement has begun and how people all helped each other along the way. You know, that was one thing that was always fascinating to me. You know, everyone who I met through that world, they were just interested to learn from one another, as you sort of describe, right? Nobody was ever in this set that I figured it all out, I've got all the answers. And maybe it was just a bunch of people who were, and certainly in my experiences too, like failing pretty hard with and kind of frustrating, but willing to share, you know. And I think that's such a powerful mechanism, you know, even for yourself today, right? If you're someone who I certainly still continue to enjoy reading your writing about things that you're trying as you build a studio. And it's certainly one thing I'm trying to practice myself of building in the open. So maybe even talk a little bit about that. Like that in itself for many people is, it's sort of an act of vulnerability. And yet, again, it's another one of these lightning rods for people who are trying to do hard things that maybe haven't been done before, to sort of put your ideas out there about, here's all the stuff that went wrong for me, and this is the thing I'm going to try next. So how did you get comfortable with that? Because that's really hard for many people. They probably feel they have to know all the answers.
I think it just comes with, honestly, failing so many times. And I genuinely enjoy writing. So before Lean Analytics, I was writing a blog that I started in 2008, maybe or so. I always enjoyed the process of writing and sort of using that to structure and codify thoughts and put ideas out there. And I don't think you should shy away from the mistakes that you've made, because other people can learn from them. I will say this, that no matter how much, so back in 2010, much less content than there is today. Now there's just an abundance of it, some of which I think is really great. Think about folks sharing benchmarks. Oh, my conversion rate looks like this. Like, I'm talking in the nitty gritty, like I run a B2B product-led growth business and I see my user acquisition. So that I think can really help folks shortcut some of the things they're trying to do. Having said that, I think no matter how much content there is out there, you really only learn by doing. And so the mistake that gets made is folks read and read and read and read and read, try to build the playbook that they believe will be perfect and guarantee success. Then they go out there and they fail and they're, well, but I learned everything. Or they never try because they feel as if they have to just keep learning forever. So to me, I've learned no matter how much I share, people are still make the same mistakes, and that's fine. I think they just have to go do that. I don't shy away from sharing mistakes that I've made. I've also done some things fairly well at the same time. I do appreciate folks that contribute back into the ecosystem for other people to pick up and learn from. So I think that the more we do that and the higher the quality of that content, the better off we are. Founders do need to hear from other founders. Sometimes you need a shoulder to lean on. And it's like, who can I lean on? And that's community. And that might not be a blog post or a podcast. That might be actually talking to another human. And you're right. Back in 2010, when Eric was writing Lean Startup and that came out, and then Ash wrote Running Lean, Ash was a mentor at Year One Labs. Toby from Shopify was a mentor at Year One Labs. Like, there was a lot of activity. 2010, 11, 12 was a pretty interesting time. And I think now you're just seeing more and more of that being shared. You can't shy away from the failures. You have to take a swing. You have to learn from it and then share those hard lessons learned. I think people just need to get comfortable with that.
You are right. There's only so much analytics you can do of reading things, but you've got to go out there and do it, right? And burn your fingers for yourself. The thing that always is interesting to me, and you sort of touch on it too as well, sharing ideas in many ways has been a calling card to bring people together in ways that I could never have imagined. I still remember around this similar time, like I was living in London at the time. Some of the people that I was working with in a company called ThoughtWorks, it's sort of pioneering agile software development and continuous delivery. It's very engineering-based culture though too as well. I remember people trying to encourage me to say, you should write about some of these things you're doing, like customer testing or getting engineers to sit with customers and show them their product and get feedback, which for most listeners, that was kind of a novel thing back then, and
yeah.
But for me, I actually initially was sort of like, why nobody would read this? Why would anyone care? And I was quite inhibited by it. But again, as I wrote the first thing and put it out there, this amazing thing started to happen. Like folks of that sort of community was starting to come together. Were like pinging me, going, "This is great. I'm trying that too." And suddenly, it had this community around it where you could sort of put your ideas out there. You could challenge one another. Like there was a really fascinating time. And that became almost like a bit like a mastermind in a way for me, where there were so many people out there who were dialed into this frequency that really, really mattered. And I just felt my learning went like through the roof, where I could be like, I'm struggling with this. What do you think? And that sort of back and forth, it's almost like Socratic process of people also helped me improve in ways that I couldn't imagine. It got me thinking differently. It got me trying stuff that I was like, that's fascinating. I still remember Kent Beck was one of the first people who said to me, when somebody tells me something that I almost have a visceral reaction to, like, that can't be possible, that's never going to work. The first thing he always does is do it, just for the sake of
just to try.
Just to try,
Yeah, why not?
Exactly. It was one of these, like, that was a great bit of coaching that he offered me at the time. Again, someone who I found through that community. It's just been such a powerful way, again, to just sort of bring these products to life. So share a little bit then about some of this building, right? Like, even your career starting off, you've been in companies from Salesforce, you've built some of these businesses as well from the ground up. So how did you sort of position yourself in a way, right? Today, you're one of these people who working in the studio, you look at everything from marketing to sales to operations, but it didn't start there. So how did you start cutting your teeth to become a builder? Yes, you were sharing, but like, what were some of the practical things you were doing to start building companies? And what did you enjoy most in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite still today is building product. So really the exercise of finding a real problem that matters to a specific group of people, building a solution that actually solves their problem, and you can validate and prove that qualitatively and quantitatively, which is then the spark of, oh, wow, this might be an actual business. To me, that's still the most fun part of it. So I still very much enjoy in the weeds, whether it's interviewing users or potential customers, wireframing, thinking about product features. And so the art and science, I suppose, of building almost exclusively software products. So to me, that's the part I genuinely enjoy the most in terms of getting my hands dirty. I think today at Highline Beta, running a venture studio, the thing that I get maybe the most happiness from is actually helping other people realize their dreams and visions. So helping another founder who thinks, oh, I want to go solve this problem for this user. And I'm like, amazing. I don't know if that's a real problem or not. I'm also not the target customer, but let's go take a swing at that and see what happens. So I think helping other people build their companies, at a high level is the thing that I get a lot of happiness from, but I can't ever take away the sort of product manager hat, which is how do I get in the weeds? I tend to be a very detail-oriented person. I'm the one that always points out all like the typos in pitch decks or things like that. And I know it annoys people, but it's just the way I work. So I love the detail part of it, of building a product and thinking about it and then putting it in the world and seeing the response from it. But really, at the end of the day, it's about helping founders and empowering them to achieve their mission and vision in areas that I don't necessarily want to dedicate my life into any specific vertical or any specific industry, because my career has never been focused on any one area. But helping other people do that is very cool.
It's funny. It's one of the things, sometimes a little bit of a pattern I find in folks that are building or contributing to venture studios. They have this sort of interest in a lot of things. And the thought of just dedicating your life to, I'm just going to build SaaS products for health and wellness businesses for, 18 to 25-year-olds. Even your face, I can see a little bit is starting to panic about being locked in that for like the next 25 years. Certainly for me, what drew me to the venture studio model of something that I learned later in my career too as well, is this idea of pursuing multiple ideas in different domains, but doing it in parallel, putting energy and experience into multiple businesses and essentially creating equity and value in those and really trying to maximize how I felt I could contribute. So maybe talk about, like, 8 years ago is actually quite a long time ago in the venture studio space. I'm not even sure if many people were using that word at that stage. And it's certainly becoming one of the, the vogue up and coming asset classes at the moment. So tell us a little bit about, as you said, you've done these individual companies. You had started the little cohort yourself and Alastair and some success there. Tell us a little bit about the moment where you were like, okay, Mom, I'm going to start a venture studio. And she obviously looked, well, I love you, Ben, but what the hell is that? So what through that moment?
Well, I stopped explaining to my mom what I did a long time ago because I don't think it ever made any sense. And then as I heard myself explain it, I'm like, well, that made no sense. So 8 years ago, decided to start a venture studio because it was an effort to combine all of the things that I had done previously. Similarly, my co-founder, Marcus, has been an investor, has run Accelerator programs, has started companies. So all this disparate experience, and we got together, and we had known each other before, but we got together and the timing was right. And we said, what if we could combine everything we've done, building companies? I had also been angel investing. So building companies, investing in companies across multiple things at the same time. Really, the 0 to 1 is where we have spent most of our careers. How can we take all of that and build a business around that? So that was really the impetus for launching Highline Beta. And, we added another dimension to it, which was corporate partners. In part, two reasons. One is because in our own portfolios, working with startups, we had seen inflection points when a startup got its first big customer or its first big partner with a large company of some kind, and said, oh, look, you can see a pattern of inflection there where when they finally break into that world, it sometimes can help that startup genuinely accelerate to the next level. So that's interesting to us. But B, also, I think venture studios struggle with a business model. Who pays for this operations? Who pays for the studio team to build stuff and all of that? And so we said, well, look, corporates are always struggling or trying to figure out how to innovate, both internally and externally. They're always trying to work with startups, but not quite sure how to do it. They don't speak the same language. We've worked with corporates. We've worked at them. So if we could work with corporates, validate opportunities with them, and then spin out startups from that, which we could then put our own capital in and support through the studio model, that seemed like an interesting thesis. So we launched Highline Beta. We have done that a few times. Not surprisingly, working with corporates is slow. And so we do continue to work with them as part of the value that I think we can bring our portfolio. It also has a business model attached to it. But we also build companies, not necessarily exclusively with corporate partners. So even our model, and I think this is going to be true for all studios, true for all businesses, we also adapted, build, measured, and learned and iterated. And, we never pivoted from sort of the core of Highline Beta to a degree, but we've certainly iterated and adapted and experimented. And we continue to do that 8 years later because, we've learned, not surprisingly, that there is no formula for success. We always knew that, but there's also no perfect formula for a venture studio. So that's why you have, a myriad of flavors of them, different people trying different things. But fundamentally, we love the 0 to 1 and going and trying to systematize that and improve. You can't say perfect because this doesn't exist, but can you improve how new startups are validated and built 0 to 1? That's what we try to do every single day. But that's where it came from, was just taking all of our experience in building companies, building products, starting companies, investing, and trying to smush all of that into a single model called the venture studio.
Yeah, no, I love it, and so much of it resonates, but it's also so fascinating, as you're describing, there's so many ways that folks are doing this, right? The venture studios, even as the term, still in its early days, as an asset class in its early days, the flavors of them, there are many, and how people are going about doing it. So it's always lovely to hear a little bit of your flavor or ingredients about what matter to you. So the things, though, that absolutely resonate with me massively, though, is I often always struggled to do one thing. And yet one domain was a struggle for me. Doing one thing was a struggle for me, right? And maybe that's why people like being product managers, because you basically have to do many things. It's not just like no, I'm the engineer, I'm the tester. And these sort of interest areas and skills. So everything you're describing, from learning how to do investing, learning how to build companies, learning how to help and coach teams build great companies. All of these skills I've often felt personally, I almost have this sort of portfolio approach to how I think about even the world. We've both written books. We both like to write, do podcasts, create companies, do customer tests. Like all of these sort of, as you say, it's a mishmash of skills that other people probably look at and go, what the hell? But yet for me, like that's what I enjoy. I love the diversity of things and almost thinking of a portfolio career. And yet a studio seemed to be like the only place where you could sort of wrap that up in a shell and go, actually, this is where I can bring a lot of these skills to bear, whether the communication side and sharing with people, lessons learned, things I've tried, what's worked, the practical hands-on from building products in the past and having those moments like you described of suddenly finding a problem that's worthy of being solved and customers doing it. One of my favorite moments in my career was building this mobile app for lastminute.com. It was a booking engine where you would book hotels at the last moment and get deals. And they were always a web-based app. And as mobile came in, we built this first ever mobile map that had such very, very simple features. It was literally like, where am I? Here's hotel in a short radius. You can book it. And how much we had to fight to just keep the product simple was like the massive. And then it launched and the thing literally went crazy. And there is so much joy in that side of it. And then, as you say, I also love helping and coaching and sharing some lessons learned to help other people build great companies. And 0 to 1, 2, it's just such a fun place. If you enjoy the absolute chaos, even your blog, I would know it's called Focus Chaos, but it is pure chaos, right? It's like we've got two sticks, we're rubbing them together, trying to start a fire in the middle of a tornado in an ice field. So when you're doing that and that's your jam, it sometimes can feel once the fire has started. I actually often struggle sometimes to stay motivated when I feel like, oh, that fire has started now. It's sort of on its way. So talk a little bit more about yourself then and, things that you've grown and developed as you've started to iterate the studio, because even as someone who's creating that studio, there's probably new skills. I've certainly had to learn a lot about the finance side of venture building, which the most exciting side for me because I was always an operator, and yet it's key in this world. So what are some of the things for you that have you've learned about yourself as you started to build the studio? Well, not started, as you continue to build the studio now over the last 8 years.
For sure. I mean, I can tell you the things I don't like. So one of them is, it turns out I'm not a terribly good people manager. And I have a tendency to jump in and do the work myself when I think I can just do it better, faster. These are not good qualities to be admitting on a podcast, but
great world. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I think you have to recognize what you're good at, what you're not good at, and really where you want to focus. So, people management, not my strong suit. That can have an impact in any organization. I mean, we're a company like any other organization. So, we've gotten better and smarter at empowering the right people within our team to run different aspects of the business. So we can focus, myself and my co-founder, Marcus, focus on the things that we're better at or more interested in. So I think that's just the evolution of any startup, is sort of you do everything at the very beginning and then you think, but I'm really terrible at these things and other people are really good at them. I should probably get my nose out of their business. I've learned now, and I don't try to pretend that I'm good at managing people. I used to have a lot of one-on-ones with people, and all I would do is talk about the work. And it turns out I was supposed to be talking about how they felt. And so it makes me sound like a sociopath. I don't think I am. So that's something I've learned. The other thing I think also interesting in any business is just how do you scale it? And what do you want to do from a scale perspective? So we're a company like any other company, and we have to think about generating revenue. We have to think about hiring the right people, empowering the right people. We have to think about what does scale mean for us? What do we want to be when we grow up? And so a lot of our time now is, okay, we've been at it for 8 years. We've had some successes. We've iterated a lot. We've made a bunch of mistakes. What's sort of the next version of Highline Beta? How do we scale it? What could that look like? Who do we have to bring on board? What kind of capital do we need? So it's just putting all those puzzle pieces together, which again is no different from any other startup that thinks, okay, I'm at this level. I've got some traction. I've got to raise some capital. How do I hire my first VP of sales? Or how do I move to a new geography or whatever it is? So studios have the same thing because they're businesses. Now they're businesses that build a bunch of businesses, which is for me the cool part. But those are the things I spend a lot of time on now is how do we scale Highline Beta? What is the future of this business? We'll see where that goes. But yeah, I've also, again, learned things about myself, the things I like to do, the things I don't like to do. And I try to stay out of the things I don't like to do and let people who do like those things do those things very well.
Yeah, more of them, it's great as well just to follow the narrative of building a venture studio, right? I'm sure there's lots of people listening to this show. They're probably curious about what a studio is, how to start one, and helping people understand that it is still a startup that creates other startups. And there's all the growing pains of it. Yeah, I still remember when I first met co-founder Mark McNally, the first call I had with him was at the beginning of 2019. He was in his shed. He had just printed out a perspex piece of plastic that said Nobody Studios on it. And he was like, hey, I'm building this thing called a venture studio. That was the moment that we got started working together on what's been a super fun journey. But yeah, day one, it's just you, whoever else was crazy enough to start this thing on the wall, and you got to start making it happen. I agree with you. There's many things I thought I would actually enjoy that I've found I've actually have to move away from and let other people do because there's other areas I need to work on that I suck at, that I enjoy. One of the things that has sort of been a huge learning for me is I used to, I would often, if people ask me, well, what the hell did I do? I would describe myself often as a product manager. But what we learned through this process, which has been a huge insight for me, is that I like building products. That's cool. But actually what I'm better at is building businesses than actually building products. And that was something that really, it was sort of like a small tear ran down the side of my face when I had this insight where I'm like, no, I thought I was good at figuring out product problems, but it's actually turned out over time that my product has sort of become the company and actually figuring out how we grow the company, which is going to help create other companies. And that wasn't something I was sort of expecting, but I've really learned to enjoy. I started to enjoy building systems to help us. How do we do our hiring systems? How do we do our onboarding for founders? These sort of features, if you will, of the venture studio have suddenly become a huge sense of reward. Ultimately, your customers are a real small cohort of people. They're like the 8 people in the studio that year or the 6 there the next year. But it's been a fascinating, even that in itself, of sort of experimentation to try things that have worked, that have failed, that have bringing people in, identifying founders that would be great to work inside studios, figuring out how do we build funding mechanisms to help these companies later. I suddenly have started to get joy from this side of company building, which is fascinating and something, I just never would have thought of going into it.
Yeah, I get it. I also would probably identify as a product manager in many circumstances, but really most of my time is not spent in the product or products ever. It's mostly spent on the business, on the business of Highline Beta and then on the businesses of the startups. It's not as much. I do enjoy getting in the weeds sometimes and mapping an onboarding flow or looking at the metrics and saying, guys, where's the riskiest assumption here? And how are you going to run an experiment to validate or invalidate it? But at the end of the day, studios are in the business of building companies. They're not in the business of building products. And then I think as studios mature, they have to productize and systematize their process. To me, I think studios are meant to create shortcuts for founders, not in a bad way, I snuck around something and cheated, but give me the shortcut tools to validate faster, get to market faster, raise capital faster, recruit a team faster. And those are all systems that a studio over time can build to support the founders that they're working with.
Yeah, I think it's the core value proposition too. So looking ahead then, what are some of the things you're excited about in the venture studio space, right? You're sneaking up on a decade of doing this, which is kind of always fun. I'm sure there's going to be, no, shake your head. It's going to be
so
great.
Old. I'm so old. That's scary.
Then tell us, what are some of the things or the trends that you're starting to see that you're sort of getting excited about in the space?
I think, studios are having a moment. What I would say is, in principle, I believe in the idea that we need more startups. Most will still fail, which is obviously a painful experience, and I've been through it a couple of times. But I think to solve all the problems that exist out there today in the world, we need more company creation. So fundamentally, trend, more startups being created, and then I think more ways of creating startups. They don't have to be created. If you track the hype cycle in the US, let's say in San Francisco, in the Valley, it gives you one lens in terms of how businesses are supposed to be built, the type of capital they're supposed to raise. They're only supposed to go for $1 billion exits, so on and so forth. That's the only way. I'm all for that because I would love $1 billion exits, but that's not the only way things need created globally. Everything is a secondary market. If you compare it to San Francisco and let's say New York, everything is a secondary, if not a tertiary market globally, including in parts of the US, and certainly where I am in Canada. I'm in Toronto. So to me, more companies need to be created, but they can't all be created with the same formula. We need more studios with other formulas, if you will, right? So I believe in that, and I believe in more studios emerging with new ways of building businesses and figuring that out based on the types of founders, based on geography, based on industry and vertical, based on access to capital, based on outcomes that you're chasing. Having said that, I think we will see similar to what we've seen with accelerators in the past, where there were many, 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 and then many of them realized, well, A, I don't have a business model here that works, so I can't sustain myself as an accelerator. And B, I'm not sure I'm outputting things that are terribly useful. So I think we will see studios go up in terms of volume, which again, I'm a fan of because I think we need more flavors and more iterations on how to build companies. But then I think we will see the back end of that, which will be studios unable to build themselves into sustainable businesses. And then you'll see studios themselves kind of fail. And that's just the way this system works. So that sucks, but I think that that's what will happen from a trend perspective. The other thing I would say here is I think we will see more specialized venture studios. Myself and others have called it a vertical venture studio. It's a venture studio in a very narrow industry or space where the playbooks, if you will, are incredibly standardized so that every time you build a company, a startup, you actually benefit from the startup that was created before. You know who the customers are, you know who the investors are, you know who the acquirers are. If you're doing, let's say, B2B enterprise SaaS, you know how to build enterprise products, you know what the pricing model is. So if you just envision this vertical stack where I'm only doing B2B enterprise in insurance, or I'm only doing Web3 gaming in Asia, or whatever the heck it is, I think we will see more specialized studios so that the systems that the studio is building and the playbooks are refined and refined and refined, and you really become an expert at that. To me, that's where venture studios are going, not so much horizontal. And Highline Beta historically has been a horizontal venture studio. We've built in a few different sort of key thematic areas, but we've done insurance, we've done supply chain, we've done financial services, we've done a myriad of things. And I think going forward, you'll see more vertical, very, very hyper-focused studios. And again, what the market will say, the global market will say, oh, that seems too small. That market seems too small. That doesn't seem like it could build big businesses. And I would say nonsense. Those are sort of the two macro trends that I see in the studio space.
It's great to hear you sort of share that too. I think this philosophy too, as well as building repeatable business models, but also repeatable systems and structures that are like optimized for a specific vertical. It just makes sense, right? If you're really good at that, people are going to hone their craft and be super at it.
Yeah, we're going to see specialization, I think, is what is going to come out of it, which says, I am an expert in product-led growth for prosumers. I know how to reach a prosumer. I know what to charge them. I know how to convince them. I've done it 3-4 times at other startups. And so now I only want to build businesses targeting that market because I have unfair or at least competitive advantage in that universe. So I think we will see studio specialization as a key trend because it should lead to better outcomes.
It should, and I think the one thing I would add to what you're saying as well is I have this sense, especially as you describe these people who've built maybe one or two of these businesses, and maybe they've been successful, and maybe they have a little bit of capital to spare. I think certainly a sense that I get from you and certainly from myself is there's this appetite maybe to like back yourself and build with the capital that you might have and help other people create companies. And for me, that's kind of the interesting little piece that might be a little bit of a disruption on the venture side. I think there's a certain type of investor who doesn't want to just put their money into a fund and sort of say, I'll see that in 7 years and cheer it around. I think if you're a builder and you want to help other builders and you want to keep building, again, this is one of the appealing things, and I have a strong sense it was for you too, is that, you can put both your energy, your experience, and your capital into building equity in these other things.
Yes.
Rather than taking up like advisor roles on 500 startups where you'll jump on a call and tell them they need to talk to customers and they'll never do it. I think if you like the hands-on aspect of building, I think this is, again, another fascinating place to sort of do that.
I agree with that. And I think, a lot of studios are built by operators who have been through the gauntlet of building a company, probably failing, hopefully winning. And then they are saying, okay, well, do I start another company in that space? Or I want to go help others do that. So the studio model makes sense. And I've actually got some of the means, or maybe all or most of the means from a capital perspective to put my money where my mouth is. I am an operator, and therefore I think I can genuinely help, not just with advice, but with the capital. To me, a studio that doesn't invest money is not actually a venture studio. I think you have to help build and fund. And so I think you will see, and you are seeing, very successful founders who are maybe saying, okay, I'm done being the CEO of something, but I want to help others. They're going to build their own studios. And then again, they don't have to be big, and they can be very specialized. You could build 3-4 companies a year, own a meaningful equity stake in those businesses, help a lot of people, and create a lot of value. So I think we will see that. And I think studios that get created where the founders of the studio are not putting their own capital to work probably don't make it because they won't be able to raise enough capital. They're not putting enough skin in the game in the model. I think you will see exactly what you've described is just very successful folks saying, I want to build a little product studio or a venture studio. I want to put my money to work. Maybe I'm investing in some funds, but I'll make my own version of that. And I'll keep it small and I'll keep it specialized and I'll create great companies.
I think we're starting to get a good shared definition of what we think a real venture studio looks like. And, I know those are a lot of the characteristics you put into your R's. We certainly did it in Noble Studios. I know it's in Highline Beta. It's always fun to catch up and hear you share some of your insights of what you're doing. I'm sure we'll have you back on the show again. I'm looking forward to building out this next version of a space together with many other people. So thanks very much for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey everyone. I hope you enjoyed that show, but I'm even more delighted to share the exciting news. I've recently co-founded a new venture studio named Nobody Studios. Now, Venture Studio is a vehicle for the rapid creation of new companies, from ideation to acceleration and growth. And our purpose at Nobody Studios will be to de-risk pre-seed stage business ideas. We'll do this by minimizing the time, speed, and capital involved in validating truly repeatable and scalable business models before any significant venture investment. We've an audacious goal to start 100 compelling companies over the next 5 years, and who knows how many beyond that. So if you're interested in radically changing the way work is done, how products are created, companies built and funded, even democratizing the wealth creation and how returns are distributed, this could be the business for you. We're looking for talent, capital, and influence. If you wish to contribute any or all of these, just get in touch. You can follow us on nobodystudios.com, on our LinkedIn page, all the social media accounts, or simply my newsletters and what I'm sharing. We'll be launching a truly innovative crowdfunding campaign, and I'd be honored if you'd be willing to join us on this journey and become a nobody yourself.